The silence in Lord Kalen Varys's residence was a manufactured thing, a sterile vacuum curated by sonic dampeners and polished chrome surfaces that swallowed sound whole. It was a silence of absolute control, the kind Kalen had cultivated his entire life, a bulwark against the chaotic symphony of a city that never slept. In this pristine quiet, every subtle noise was an intrusion, the whisper-soft slide of a servo door, the faint hum of the climate control system cycling purified air, the almost imperceptible scuff of soft-soled shoes on the white marble floor. That last sound belonged to Elian. He was a creature of this silence, moving through the expansive, minimalist spaces of the penthouse with a grace that bordered on non-existence. He was catalogued in the Varys household system as Attendant 734, a beta of unremarkable lineage, assigned to manage the Lord's personal affairs. His presence was meant to be functional, invisible, a seamless extension of the automated environment. Kalen rarely looked at him, not truly. He saw the function, not the form. A hand setting down a tray with a glass of nutrient-rich water, a slender figure adjusting the light-filtering capacity of the panoramic windows, a quiet presence ensuring the precise arrangement of data slates on his obsidian desk. The attendant was efficient, silent, and utterly devoid of scent, the three qualities Kalen valued most in his staff. A scentless beta was a perfect cog in the machine of his life, a life dedicated to order, logic, and the suppression of the very instincts that defined his alpha designation. The concordance, the governing body that had perfected societal stratification, taught that instinct was a primitive relic, a biological echo that could be mastered through discipline and pharmacology. Kalen was the embodiment of that teaching. His own scent, a sharp, cold fragrance of winter pine and ozone, was kept tightly leashed, a weapon to be deployed, not an emotion to be broadcast. Elian, for his part, had perfected the art of being a shadow. He had learned to modulate his breathing so it fell into the same rhythm as the ambient hum of the residence. He had mastered a way of walking that displaced minimal air, of placing objects down without a single click. His features were placid, his gaze perpetually lowered, his expression a carefully maintained neutral mask. He was a ghost in a glass cage, and the cage was this sterile palace in the sky, 1,000 meters above the sprawling, neon-drenched metropolis. Inside, he was a maelstrom of observation. He saw everything Kalen missed. He saw the faint tension line that perpetually bracketed the Lord's mouth, a testament to a control so absolute it had to be painful. He saw the way Kalen's long fingers would sometimes clench into a fist when he thought no one was watching, a fleeting betrayal of some deep, contained frustration. He saw the loneliness in the man's steel-grey eyes when he stood before the vast windows at night, looking down at the river of light that was the city below, a king surveying a kingdom he commanded but could not touch. Elian catalogued these details, these minute cracks in the flawless facade, and stored them away in the silent fortress of his mind. He did this not out of malice or curiosity, but out of a deep, instinctual need to understand the mechanics of his confinement, to understand the man who was, in essence, his keeper. He had been in this residence for 3 years, delivered by a concordance placement agent with a file that was mostly redactions and a bio-signature that read as flat as a still lake. He remembered the facility before this, a place of white walls and softer voices that dripped with clinical poison. They had told him he was being given a chance at a productive life, a service placement befitting his docile, unremarkable nature. They had called it a kindness. He knew it was a lie. The suppressants they administered were a part of his daily routine, a small, chalky tablet he took with his morning meal, tasteless and absolute. They muted the world, sanding down the sharp edges of sensation, leaving everything feeling distant, muffled, as if he were living life from behind a thick pane of glass. They also erased him, scrubbing away the scent that the doctors in that white facility had called a genetic anomaly, a dangerous variance. They had stripped him of his essence and called it peace. Tonight, something was different. A subtle charge hummed in the recycled air, a low-frequency thrum that seemed to vibrate in his bones. Outside, beyond the armored glass, the city was bathed in an unusual celestial light. The orbital mirrors were angled to reflect the glow of the Centauri moon, a rare celestial body whose elliptical orbit brought it close to their planet only once every decade. Its light was not the cold, sterile silver of their own primary moon, but a strange, ethereal blue, a light that felt ancient and alive. Kalen stood by the window, his back to the room, a tall, severe silhouette against the sapphire-tinted cityscape. He was agitated. Elian could feel it, a discordant note in the usually placid symphony of the Lord's contained energy. His shoulders were rigid, the line of his spine taut. Elian moved silently to retrieve the Lord's evening tea, a calming blend of genetically engineered herbs designed to promote restorative sleep. As he prepared it in the small, automated alcove, he felt a strange tremor begin deep within his own body. It started as a faint warmth in his belly, a soft, unfamiliar pulsing that he initially dismissed as a malfunction of his own biology, a side effect of years of chemical alteration. He placed the delicate porcelain cup on a lacquered tray and approached his master. "My lord," he said, his voice the same soft, unobtrusive monotone he always used. Kalen did not turn. "Leave it on the table." The command was sharp, clipped, colder than usual. Elian obeyed, his movements fluid and economical. As he set the tray down, the warmth inside him suddenly intensified, unfurling like a slow-blooming flower of heat. A wave of dizziness washed over him, and for a terrifying second, the world tilted, the sharp lines of the room blurring at the edges. He placed a hand on the back of a chair to steady himself, his breath catching in his throat. A scent, faint and fleeting, teased the edge of his perception. It was sweet and wild, like night-blooming jasmine and rain-soaked earth, a fragrance so alien in this sterile environment that he thought he must be hallucinating. He pressed his lips together, forcing the sensation down, wrestling his body back under the ironclad control that had been his only shield for as long as he could remember. He was Attendant 734. He was nothing. A ghost, a function. He had to be. But the strange blue light of the distant moon continued to pour through the window, and deep within him, something that had been sleeping for a very, very long time was beginning to stir, awakened by the celestial tide. And for the first time in years, the silence of the penthouse felt not like a shield, but like the held breath before a terrible, beautiful storm. Kalen felt the shift before he could process it. It was a subtle disturbance in the calibrated atmosphere of his home, a disruption to the delicate equilibrium he enforced with an iron will. He had been staring at the Centauri moon, its sapphire glow painting the clouds in hues of violet and indigo, feeling an uncharacteristic restlessness crawl under his skin. The alphas of his station were trained to be impervious to such environmental whims, to celestial cycles and atmospheric pressures. They were masters of their own biology, their instincts bridled by logic and technology. Yet the strange light seemed to pull at something primal within him, a low, resonant hum that vibrated just beneath the surface of his disciplined consciousness. He had dismissed it as a trick of the light, a symptom of fatigue after a grueling week of negotiations at the Concordance Directorate. He had dismissed the attendant, his voice sharper than intended, because the man's silent, unassuming presence suddenly felt intrusive, a variable he could not account for. And then it happened. A scent. It was impossible. The residence's filtration systems were absolute, scrubbing the air of all organic particles, all pollens, all pheromones. His own scent was locked down by daily inhibitors, and the attendant was a registered beta, scentless by nature. Yet it was there, a fragile, ephemeral fragrance that bloomed in the air for a fraction of a second, so faint he thought he might have imagined it. It was unlike anything he had ever encountered, not the cloying perfumes of the court Omegas or the aggressive musk of rival alphas. This was something else entirely. It was wild and clean, evocative of things he only knew from simulation archives. Rain on dry soil that dwarfed the sweet nectar of a flower he could not name, the clean, sharp scent of ozone after a lightning strike. It was a scent of life, raw and untamed, and it cut through the sterile air of his home like a shard of glass. He turned, his movements sharp and precise, his grey eyes narrowing. Elian was standing by the chair, one hand gripping its back, his normally placid face pale, his posture unnaturally still. For the first time, Kalen truly looked at him. Not at the uniform, not at the function, but at the man. He saw the subtle tremor in the hand that rested on the chair, the faint sheen of sweat on his temple, the way his throat worked as he swallowed. He saw the flicker of something in the depths of those downcast eyes, not fear, not yet, but a dawning, bewildered panic. "Are you unwell, attendant?" Kalen's voice was cold, clinical. It was an inquiry into a malfunctioning piece of equipment, not a question of concern. Elian flinched, a barely perceptible motion, and straightened immediately, his hand falling away from the chair. "No, my lord. Forgive me. A moment of imbalance." His voice was strained, thinner than usual, the carefully constructed monotone fraying at the edges. Kalen's gaze swept the room, his senses on high alert. The scent was gone, as quickly as it had appeared, leaving only the sterile hum of the purifiers. He took a step closer, his analytical mind searching for a logical explanation. A breach in the filtration system, a contaminant brought in on a delivery, an allergic reaction. He stopped a few feet from Elian, his presence dominating the space between them. He was taller, broader, a predator by design, and the attendant seemed to shrink under his scrutiny, his shoulders hunching almost imperceptibly. "Report to the medbay for a diagnostic scan," Kalen commanded. "I will not have system unpredictability within my residence." Elian's head bowed lower. "At once, my lord." He turned to leave, his movements stiff, lacking their usual spectral grace. But as he passed, Kalen caught it again, the scent. This time it was stronger, clinging to the attendant's skin, woven into the fabric of his simple grey uniform. It was richer now, deeper, with a new note emerging from beneath the sweetness. Something warm and spicy, like sun-baked amber and sandalwood. It was intoxicating, it was impossible, and it was unequivocally, undeniably the scent of an omega. An omega in the first nascent stages of a heat, a powerful one, a raw biological truth that defied every piece of data in Attendant 734's file. Instinct, violent and immediate, slammed into Kalen with the force of a physical blow. A possessive, primal urge rose from the deepest part of his being, an instinct he had spent his entire life suppressing. It was a dark, feral thing that snarled at the disciplined man he had built himself to be. It wanted to claim, to protect, to possess the source of that impossible, beautiful scent. He reached out, his hand closing, around Elian's upper arm, his grip like steel. The attendant froze, a choked gasp escaping his lips. The touch was electric. Through the thin fabric of the uniform, Kalen could feel the heat radiating from his skin, the fine tremor that shook his entire body. He pulled the man around to face him, forcing his chin up with his other hand. For the first time, their eyes met. Elian's eyes were not the dull brown he had vaguely registered, but a startling, luminous hazel, wide with a terror that was swiftly being eclipsed by a profound, disoriented confusion. In their depths, Kalen saw the reflection of his own shock, his own carefully constructed world fracturing into a million pieces. The ghost in his home had a face, the function had a soul, and the scentless beta he had ignored for 3 years was an omega of breathtaking potency, awakening under the light of a strange blue moon, right in the heart of his fortress of control. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with the deafening roar of a truth that could destroy them both. The world had dissolved into a maelstrom of sensation for Elian. The touch of Kalen's hand was a brand, a point of searing focus in the spiraling chaos of his own body. Heat, no longer a gentle warmth, but a raging fever, flooded his veins, making his skin prickle and his head spin. The suppressants were not just failing, they were being violently purged from his system, the chemical dams crumbling before a tidal wave of dormant biology. Decades of muted senses were crashing back into him all at once. The filtered air suddenly tasted of ozone and electricity. The low hum of the residence was a deafening roar in his ears. The soft fabric of his uniform felt like sandpaper against his hypersensitive skin. But most overwhelming of all was the scent. His own scent, a fragrance he had not experienced since he was a child, before the white rooms and the gentle lying doctors. It was pouring from him, thick and undeniable, a fragrant banner of his true nature, unfurled for the first time in this sterile cage. It smelled of shame and freedom, of terror and a strange, fierce joy. And then there was Kalen's scent. Beneath the sharp, clinical inhibitors the Lord wore, a powerful, intoxicating aroma was beginning to bleed through, awakened by his own. It was the scent of a dominant alpha, pure and undiluted, the crisp, cold scent of high-altitude pine, of ancient stone, and of a storm gathering over a frozen lake. It was terrifying. It was magnificent. It called to a part of him he didn't know existed, a deep, cellular yearning that was both exhilarating and horrifying. He was trapped, held fast in the Lord's unyielding grip, his gaze locked with those piercing grey eyes. He saw the shock there, the disbelief warring with a raw, predatory darkness that made his breath catch. This was the man who had seen him as no more than a piece of furniture, a silent automaton. Now, that man was looking at him as if he were the only thing in the universe. "What are you?" Kalen's voice was a low growl, the carefully modulated baritone fractured by a primal tremor. It was not a question. It was an accusation. Elian couldn't answer. His throat was tight, his mind a whirlwind of fragmented memories and overwhelming physical sensations. He remembered a woman's hand stroking his hair, a garden that smelled of damp earth, a man's voice, hushed and urgent. "They will hunt you for what you are, my son. You must hide it. You must never let them know." The memory vanished, swept away by another wave of heat. He swayed, his knees threatening to buckle. Kalen's grip tightened, holding him upright, pulling him closer until their bodies were almost flush. The proximity was agonizing, a torment of conflicting signals. His instincts screamed at him to submit, to yield to the overwhelming power of the alpha before him, while every shred of his conscious mind, every lesson of survival he had ever learned, shrieked at him to run, to hide, to disappear. "Your file," Kalen said, his voice strained as he fought his own instincts. "It says you are a beta, gen-scanned, certified." He spoke the words as if they were a catechism, a shield of logic against the undeniable truth saturating the air between them. "Files can be altered," Elian managed to whisper, the words raw and broken. "Data can be corrupted." Kalen's eyes narrowed, searching his face, trying to reconcile the ghost he knew with the creature standing before him. The disciplined ruler of this sterile domain was losing a battle against the beast within. The pupils of his grey eyes were dilated, the cold logic replaced by a burning, possessive fire. His own control was slipping. The scent of ozone and pine intensified, wrapping around Elian, staking a claim. Suddenly, a chime echoed through the penthouse, sharp and intrusive, the sound of the private comlink. It broke the spell. Kalen flinched, his head snapping toward the source of the sound, the predatory focus in his eyes momentarily disrupted. He looked back at Elian, at the pale, trembling man in his grasp, and a flicker of his old, calculated self returned. He saw the situation not just as a biological impossibility, but as a political and strategic nightmare. An unregistered, potent Omega in his private residence was not just a complication, it was a death sentence. For Elian, certainly, and quite possibly for him, for harboring such an anomaly. The concordance did not tolerate genetic variance. They neutralized it with brutal efficiency. He released Elian abruptly, stepping back as if burned. The loss of contact was so sudden that Elian stumbled, catching himself on the edge of the desk. The comlink chimed again, more insistent this time. "Go," Kalen commanded, his voice once again clipped and harsh, but now laced with a new, urgent undertone. "To my chambers, the inner suite. Lock the door. Do not make a sound. Do not respond to anyone." Elian stared at him, confused. He had expected anger, disgust, a call to the enforcers. He had expected his life to be over. He had not expected this, a command to hide, a shield. "Go, now!" Kalen's voice was a whip crack. Without another word, Elian turned and fled, his legs unsteady. He moved through the silent, cavernous living area, past sterile art installations and holographic displays, his own sweet, traitorous scent trailing behind him. He reached the door to Kalen's private chambers, a seamless panel of brushed steel, and pressed his palm against the scanner. It hissed open, and he slipped inside, sealing himself in. The inner suite was a world of muted greys and blacks, even more severe and controlled than the rest of the penthouse. But as the door sealed, cutting him off from Kalen, the full force of his body's betrayal hit him. A deep, aching cramp seized his abdomen, and he doubled over, gasping. The heat was no longer a rising tide, it was a deluge. Alone in the heart of the Alpha's sanctuary, surrounded by the faint, lingering scent of pine and cold stone, Elian collapsed to the plush carpet, his body finally surrendering to the storm that the moon had unleashed. Back in the main room, Kalen stood for a moment, the ghost of jasmine and amber clinging to the air, a fragrant poison in his pristine world. He took a deep, steadying breath, forcing his heart rate down, clamping the lid back on his own roaring instincts. He smoothed his immaculate tunic and walked to the comm panel, his face a mask of cold composure. He activated the screen. The face of Director Valerius, his direct superior and the architect of the Concordance's genetic purity program, materialized in crisp holography. Valerius was an older Alpha, his face a web of fine lines, his eyes as cold and dead as chips of obsidian. Lord Varys, the director's voice was smooth, cultured, and utterly devoid of warmth. A pleasant evening to you. I trust you are observing the Centauri transit. Director, Kalen inclined his head slightly. I was. An impressive celestial display. Indeed, Valerius said, his lips curving into a smile that did not reach his eyes. It has also triggered certain atmospheric and biological resonances we are monitoring. We've detected a significant pheromonal surge originating from your sector. An anomaly. Unregistered. Potent. Kalen's blood ran cold. He kept his expression impassive, a perfect mask of polite curiosity. Is that so? I have detected nothing. My residence's systems are fully shielded and operational. Valerius's smile widened. Of course they are, my lord. Your discipline is legendary. Nevertheless, a team of purity enforcers is being dispatched to sweep the sector as a precaution. They will likely require access to all residences in the upper spire. A mere formality, you understand. Kalen felt the trap closing. I understand completely, Director. I will ensure my staff grants them every courtesy. Excellent, Valerius said. Order must be maintained, especially on nights like this, when the baser elements of our nature are stirred. Good night, Lord Varys. The hologram vanished, leaving Kalen alone in the silent room, the director's veiled threat hanging in the air. He was trapped. The enforcers were coming, and hidden in the heart of his sanctuary was a secret that would burn his entire world to the ground. He was not an asset. He was not an experiment. He was a time bomb. And the clock was ticking. Inside Kalen's private chambers, the world had narrowed to the confines of his own body. Elian was curled on the floor, adrift in a sea of feverish heat and sensory overload. The luxurious, dark grey carpet felt cool against his burning skin, a small anchor in the tempest. The room was a sanctuary and a prison, saturated with the residual scent of the Alpha who had locked him inside. It was a clean, sharp fragrance, woven into the sheets of the large, austere bed, embedded in the dark wood of the furniture, a constant, low-level hum of power that both soothed and terrified his newly awakened senses. His mind, usually a fortress of quiet observation, was a chaotic landscape of fragmented images and raw emotion. He saw flashes of the white facility, the sterile corridors, the kindly-faced doctor who had explained that his condition was a sickness, a defect that they would cure. He remembered the cold prick of the needle, the gradual numbing of the world, the slow chemical erasure of his self. They hadn't cured him. They had buried him alive. And now, The ghost was clawing its way out of the grave. A wave of pain, sharp and deep, radiated from his lower back, and he cried out, the sound muffled by the plush carpet. It was an ache of becoming, of a body forcibly reawakening, of systems kicking back online after years of induced dormancy. He was sweating, his simple uniform clinging to his skin, his hair damp against his forehead. The scent pouring from him was overwhelming now. A thick, sweet cloud of jasmine, amber, and something else, something deeper and more complex, a note of wild honey and damp moss, a fragrance of deep, untamed nature. It was the scent of his lineage, a truth he had been taught to fear, to despise. He was a prime. The word surfaced from the depths of his memory, a whisper from his mother's lips in a dreamlike recollection. They fear it, Elian. They fear what they cannot control. What had they done to her, to his father? The memories were like smoke, impossible to grasp. The concordance had not just suppressed his biology, they had fractured his past, leaving him with a hollow space where a family should have been. He pushed himself up, his limbs trembling, and crawled towards the large bed. He needed to hide, to make himself small. The instincts screaming through him were primal. Find a safe place, build a nest, wait for the alpha. The thought sent a jolt of pure terror through him. Kalen, the lord of this sterile cage, the man who had looked at him with a terrifying mixture of shock and possession. Was he the alpha his instincts were crying out for? The idea was a violation, a monstrous paradox. He served this man. He was this man's property, a registered attendant, less than human in the eyes of the concordance. And yet, his body, his treacherous, traitorous body, yearned for the powerful, controlled alpha who had just locked him away. The scent of pine and ozone was a promise of safety and a threat of annihilation, all at once. He pulled himself onto the edge of the bed, burying his face in the cool, smooth fabric of the coverlet. It smelled more strongly of Kalen here, and he inhaled deeply, a ragged, involuntary sob escaping him. The scent calmed the frantic, panicked edge of his heat, grounding him even as it terrified him. He was losing himself, his carefully constructed identity as the invisible attendant dissolving in the acid of his own biology. Who was he, if not attendant 734? Who was this creature of scent and heat and desperate, aching need? He was an anomaly, a threat, the very thing the concordance hunted and destroyed, and the enforcers were coming. Kalen's curt, urgent commands echoed in his mind. Lock the door. Do not make a sound. He was being protected, shielded, by the one man who had every reason to turn him in. Why? The question was a sharp point of clarity in the fog of his delirium. Was it a flicker of compassion? Or was it something else? The possessive fire he had seen in the Lord's eyes suggested a motive far more primal, far more dangerous than simple kindness. The alpha had seen something he wanted, a rare prize, and was now protecting his potential acquisition from rival predators. He was not being saved. He was being claimed. The realization was a shard of ice in the furnace of his heat. He was a pawn in a game he didn't understand. His own body, the chessboard. He was not an asset. He was not an experiment. He was a possession. The thought clarified his terror, giving it a sharp, cold edge. He would not be a prize. He would not be a possession. He would not trade one cage for another, no matter how gilded. He had to get control. He pushed himself away from the comforting scent on the bed, his jaw clenched. He staggered to the adjoining bathroom, a cavern of black marble and gleaming chrome. He turned on the water in the sonic shower, cranking it to the coldest setting. He stripped off his damp uniform and stepped into the icy, vibrating spray. The shock was brutal, a violent slap to his overheated senses. The cold was a clean, sharp pain that cut through the haze of his fever. He stood there, shivering, gasping, forcing his mind to focus. He had to suppress the scent. He had to mask it somehow. The sonic waves scrubbed at his skin, but they couldn't wash away the pheromones that were blooming from his pores, a fragrant beacon in the night. The water ran over him, cold and merciless, but it couldn't extinguish the fire inside. He could only hope to dampen it, to buy a few precious minutes. As he stood there, trembling under the onslaught of cold, he heard a faint click, the sound of the suite's main door being unlocked. His heart hammered against his ribs. It was Kalen. He had returned. The shower shut off automatically as he stepped out, his body shivering, his skin slick with cold water. He wrapped a thick, dark towel around his waist and stood, frozen, in the center of the bathroom, listening. He heard the whisper of the door sliding shut, then the soft, measured footsteps of the alpha moving through the bedroom. The scent of pine and ozone grew stronger, laced with an undercurrent of tension, of barely suppressed urgency. Elian held his breath, a cornered animal waiting for the predator to appear in the doorway. He was vulnerable, exposed, his body still thrumming with the suppressed waves of his heat. The battle for control was far from over, and the next phase was about to begin. Kalen entered his chambers and was immediately assaulted by the scent. It was thicker in here, a heady, intoxicating perfume of jasmine and honeyed amber that clung to every surface. It was the scent of a nest, the primal marker of an omega, claiming a space. His own instincts roared in response, a possessive surge that demanded he find the source, mark it as his own, and eliminate any threat to it. He fought the urge down with a viciousness that left him breathless, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. Logic, strategy, survival. These were the pillars of his existence, and he clung to them now as a drowning man clings to wreckage. Valerius's call had been a clear, unmistakable threat. The pheromonal surge had been detected, its origin pinpointed to his location. The enforcers were not a precaution. They were a hunting party. They would be here within the hour, armed with scent analyzers, bioscanners, and the absolute authority of the concordance. They would tear his residence apart to find the source of the anomaly. He had to hide Elian. Not just in a locked room, but somewhere their technology could not penetrate. He scanned the room, his mind racing through schematics and security protocols. His eyes landed on a seamless panel of dark wood on the far wall. It was a relic from a more paranoid era, a feature his father had insisted upon when the tower was built. A shielded, safe room, designed to be invisible to all but the most sophisticated, military-grade sensors. It was soundproof, lead-lined, and had its own independent, closed-loop air filtration system. It was perfect. A tomb. He heard the sonic shower shut off and knew Elian was in the bathroom. He had to get him into the safe room before the enforcers arrived. He walked to the bathroom door, his steps measured, betraying none of the frantic urgency clawing at his insides. He stopped just outside, not wanting to corner the terrified man within. "Attendant," he said, his voice low and steady. He used the formal title deliberately, an attempt to re-establish some semblance of their old dynamic, to impose order on the chaos. "The concordance is aware of a disturbance. Enforcers are on their way. You are in danger." There was a long silence from within the bathroom, then a soft, hesitant voice. "What do you want from me?" The question was quiet, but it was not the voice of a submissive servant. It was the voice of someone assessing a threat, someone who had been caged before and knew the nature of keepers. Kalen was taken aback by the strength in it. This was not the broken, delirious creature he had half expected. The cold shower had clearly done more than cool a fever. "I want you to live," Kalen answered, the truth of the statement surprising even himself. He had not analyzed the motive, had not calculated the potential benefits or risks. It had been a purely instinctual reaction. Protect. The word echoed in his mind, an alpha's imperative. He pushed it down. "There is a place you can hide, a shielded room. Their scanners will not find you there, but you must go now." The bathroom door slid open. Elian stood there, wrapped in a dark towel, water droplets clinging to his pale skin and dark hair. The cold had suppressed the worst of the flush, but his hazel eyes were luminous, wide with a mixture of fear and defiance. The scent rolling off him, though slightly dampened, was still potent enough to make Kalen's teeth ache. For a moment, they just stared at each other. The power dynamic that had defined their existence for 3 years was gone, incinerated. They were no longer lord and attendant. They were an alpha and an omega, two poles of a biological reality that their society had tried to tame and regulate into extinction. They were a secret that could get them both killed. "Why?" Elian asked again, his voice stronger this time. "Why would you protect me? I am an anomaly, a liability. Reporting me is the logical course of action." He was testing him, using Kalen's own cherished logic against him. The irony was not lost on Kalen. "The logical course of action is not always the correct one," Kalen said, his voice tight. "Your existence here is my failure of security, my responsibility. Now, we are out of time." He turned and walked to the wooden panel, pressing his palm against a specific, unmarked spot. With a near-silent hiss, the panel slid aside, revealing a dark, narrow opening. The air that wafted out was cool and sterile, utterly devoid of scent. "In here," he commanded. Elian did not move. He looked from the dark opening back to Kalen, his expression unreadable. He was weighing his options, the unknown predator before him, or the certain death that was coming. The lesser of two evils. "What happens when they leave?" Elian asked. "What happens to me then?" "We will deal with that when the time comes," Kalen said, a hint of impatience coloring his tone. "First, we survive the night." He could feel the seconds ticking away. The enforcers were efficient. They would be at the ground-level security checkpoint by now. Elian took a deep breath, a final, silent assessment. Then, with a quiet dignity that seemed utterly at odds with his desperate situation, he walked past Kalen and stepped into the darkness of the safe room. Kalen moved to follow, to secure the door from the outside, but Elian stopped him. "The room will be scent neutral," he said, his voice soft but clear. "But this entire suite, it smells of me. They will know." He was right. Kalen's mind had been so focused on hiding the source that he had overlooked the lingering evidence. The enforcer's scent analyzers were sensitive enough to detect pheromones from hours, even days, prior. They would know an Omega had been here, and they would not leave until they found him. "I will handle it," Kalen said. But how? He couldn't scrub the air in time. He couldn't erase the fragrant molecules that had already bonded with every surface. There was only one way to overwhelm a potent Omega scent with a more potent Alpha scent. It was a dangerous, reckless gamble. Releasing his scent so strongly would be a violation of Concordance Protocol, a sign of lost control that would draw Valerius's suspicion. But it was the only chance they had. He looked at Elian, who stood half-hidden in the shadows of the safe room, watching him, waiting. "Seal the door from the inside," Kalen ordered. "There is a control panel on your right. Do not open it, for any reason, until I come for you." Elian hesitated for a second, then gave a single, sharp nod. He disappeared into the darkness. Kalen pressed his palm against the panel, and the heavy, shielded door slid shut with a solid, final thud. He was alone again, in his chambers, alone with the lingering ghost scent of jasmine and amber. He took a deep breath, reached into the collar of his tunic, and removed the small, metallic disc attached to his skin. The inhibitor, the chemical leash he had worn for his entire adult life. He crushed it in his fist, and for the first time in 15 years, Kalen Varys let the storm out. The room exploded with his scent. It was not the controlled, muted fragrance others knew, but the raw, untamed power of a dominant alpha. The scent of a raging winter storm, of vast, ancient forests of pine, of ozone and lightning cracking across a frozen sky. It was a scent of absolute territoriality, a declaration of power so potent it was almost a physical force. It saturated the air, clinging to the walls, the furniture, the carpet, violently scrubbing Elian's softer, sweeter scent from the atmosphere, replacing it with his own overwhelming, aggressive claim. "This is my territory," it screamed. "There is nothing here but me." As the building's alert system chimed, announcing the arrival of the purity enforcers in the lobby, Kalen stood in the center of the room, a pillar of cold fury, cloaking a desperate secret in a shroud of pure, unadulterated dominance. He had made his choice. He had stepped off the path of logic and control, and there was no going back. The enforcers moved with the silent, synchronized efficiency of predators. There were 4 of them, clad in matte black armor that absorbed the light, their faces obscured by reflective visors. They were extensions of the Directorate's will, instruments of genetic purity, and they carried with them an aura of cold, detached menace. Kalen met them at the entrance to his penthouse, his face a mask of aristocratic disdain. He had redressed in a fresh, severe tunic, his posture rigid, his expression radiating an impatience that bordered on contempt. The air around him was thick with the scent of his unleashed dominance, a palpable pressure that made the lead enforcer a stocky alpha whose own scent was a dull, brutish odor of iron and rust, take an involuntary half-step back. Lord Varys, the enforcer's voice, was a synthesized rasp from his helmet speaker. "By order of Director Valerius, we are conducting a sector-wide pheromonal sweep." "So the Director informed me," Kalen replied, his voice dripping with ice. "I find this intrusion into my private residence highly irregular. My systems are state-of-the-art. There is no possibility of an unregistered presence here." The enforcer held up a device, a silver wand with a glowing blue tip, a portable scent analyzer. "A formality, my lord. We must be thorough." Kalen stepped aside, making a show of reluctant compliance. "Be quick about it. Your presence is disrupting the tranquility of my home." He had calculated the risk. Releasing his scent was a violation, but a minor one compared to harboring a prime Omega. It would be interpreted as a show of arrogance, an alpha lord chafing at having his territory invaded by lesser authorities. It was a believable act of defiance, one that would hopefully mask the act of desperation it truly was. The enforcers swept through the living area, their wands tracing patterns in the air. Kalen watched them, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. Every muscle in his body was coiled, ready to act, to fight, to kill if necessary. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced since his brutal training in the Alpha Academies, a primal readiness that he had thought long since buried under layers of discipline and civility. The lead enforcer's device whirred near the spot where Elian had almost fainted. The blue light flickered, and the enforcer paused. Kalen's blood turned to ice. "There is a residual reading here," the enforcer rasped, turning his visored face towards Kalen. "Faint. Omega pheromones." Kalen did not flinch. He raised a single, imperious eyebrow. "Indeed. I had a guest earlier this evening, Lady Anya of House Cygnus. Her visit was brief, and her presence cloying. I had the purifiers on maximum cycle to remove her perfume after she left. It seems they were not entirely successful. It was a lie, slick and seamless. Lady Anya was a vapid, officially sanctioned Omega, known for her ridiculously strong synthetic perfumes. It was a plausible, if distasteful, explanation. The enforcer seemed to consider it. His helmet tilted slightly. He gestured to his team, who continued their sweep, moving towards the hallway that led to Kalen's private chambers. "We will need to scan the entire residence, my lord, including your personal quarters." "That is unacceptable," Kalen stated, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. The air crackled with his pheromonal output, a clear warning. "My chambers are private." "Our orders are absolute," the enforcer countered, unmoved. He was a tool of the Directorate, and the will of Valerius superseded aristocratic privilege. He knew it, and he knew Kalen knew it. It was a standoff. Kalen held the enforcer's gaze for a long moment, then gave a curt, angry nod. "Very well, but you will do so in my presence." He led them down the hall, his own powerful scent growing almost suffocatingly strong as they approached the epicenter of his pheromonal release. When they entered his chambers, the enforcers recoiled. The sheer concentration of Kalen's alpha scent was like a physical blow, a territorial roar made manifest. It was designed to intimidate, to overwhelm, to obliterate any other fragrance in the room. The lead enforcer's analyzer whined, its sensors overloaded. The blue light flashed erratically. "My lord," the enforcer said, a hint of strain in his synthesized voice, "your pheromonal output is exceeding regulated limits." "Is it?" Kalen replied, his voice a silken threat. "Perhaps I am displeased by this violation of my home. Or perhaps your equipment is malfunctioning." He walked over to his desk and deliberately picked up a heavy crystal decanter, his fingers wrapping around its neck. It was not a weapon, but the way he held it was a clear promise of violence. The enforcers swept the room, their movements now hurried, their professionalism eroded by the sheer oppressive weight of Kalen's dominance. Their wands registered nothing but the overwhelming scent of pine and ozone. They passed the seamless wooden panel of the safe room without a second glance, their senses completely blinded. In the absolute silence and darkness of the hidden room, Elian was pressed against the cold metal door, listening. He could not hear them, but he could feel the vibrations through the thick panel, the faint, deep thrum of their armored boots. More than that, he could feel Kalen. Even through the lead lining and the shielded walls, A trace of the Alpha's power reached him, a psychic echo of the territorial battle being waged just outside. It was a terrifying, protective force, a raging storm that was shielding him from harm. He slid down to the floor, wrapping his arms around his knees, his body still trembling with the aftershocks of his heat. He was trapped in the dark, his fate in the hands of a man he barely knew, a man who was his master, his captor, and now, inexplicably, his protector. He didn't know which role was the most dangerous. The lead enforcer finally lowered his wand. "The area is clear," he rasped, his tone clipped. "The initial reading was likely an echo, as you suggested, my lord, overwhelmed by the current atmospheric conditions." "Then your business here is concluded," Kalen said, setting the decanter down with a soft click. "See yourselves out." Without another word, the enforcers turned and marched out of the room, their retreat swift and orderly. Kalen followed them to the main entrance of the penthouse, watching in cold silence as the door slid shut behind them. He stood there for a full minute after they were gone, his senses still on high alert, listening to the silence. The immediate danger had passed, but the war had just begun. Valerius was not a fool. He would not be satisfied with the enforcer's report. He would see Kalen's display of dominance not as arrogance, but as concealment. He had revealed his hand. He had openly defied the system. Now, he and the impossible creature hidden in his wall were truly alone, fugitives in their own home, with the full, methodical weight of the concordance poised to crash down upon them. He walked back to his chambers, the adrenaline beginning to fade, leaving a cold, clear certainty in its place. He had crossed a line from which there was no return. His life of order and control was over. He had traded it all, in a single, instinctual moment, for the life of a man whose name he had barely bothered to learn. He stood before the wooden panel, the scent of his own fury still hanging heavy in the air, and wondered if he had just saved Elian, or merely condemned them both to a slower, more complicated death. The silence that followed the enforcer's departure was heavier, more profound than the sterile quiet that had come before. It was a silence filled with unspoken consequences, with the weight of a choice that had irrevocably altered the course of two lives. Kalen stood before the sealed door of the safe room, the raging storm of his pheromones slowly receding, leaving behind the sharp, clean scent of pine and the cold tang of ozone. He felt exposed. For the first time in his adult life, he had acted not from logic or strategy, but from a raw, primal instinct. The discipline that had been his armor for decades felt thin and brittle. He had protected the Omega. He had lied to the Directorate. He had challenged Valerius. He had set fire to the perfectly constructed edifice of his life. And for what? For a pair of luminous hazel eyes and a scent that promised a world of wild, untamed beauty he had only ever read about in forbidden texts. He felt a wave of self-recrimination, a cold backlash of logic. This was madness. The correct course of action, the sane course of action, would have been to sedate the attendant and hand him over. He could have claimed ignorance of the man's true nature, feigned outrage at the deception. His record was flawless. He would have been believed. His life would have returned to its predictable, orderly rhythm. But the thought of handing Elian over to Valerius's scientists, of seeing that defiant spark in his eyes extinguished in a sterile lab, sent a fresh surge of protective fury through him. It was an illogical, emotional response, and it terrified him more than the threat of the concordance. He was compromised. He, Lord Kalen Varys, the paragon of alpha control, was compromised by an unknown, unregistered Omega, who, until a few hours ago, had been nothing more than a ghost in his periphery. He had to know why. He had to understand the nature of the anomaly he was now harboring. He placed his palm on the panel and the shielded door slid open. The air inside was cool and neutral, a stark contrast to the pheromonally charged atmosphere of the bedroom. Elian was huddled on the floor, a small, tense shape in the darkness. As the light from the bedroom spilled in, he looked up, his eyes wide and luminous, like a forest creature caught in the beam of a hunter's light. He was no longer wearing the towel. He had found a simple, dark grey tunic and trousers in the safe room's emergency locker, a spare set of Kalen's own. The clothes were far too large for his slender frame, the sleeves rolled up, the collar loose around his neck. He looked young, fragile, and utterly lost, but his gaze was steady, watchful. "They are gone." His voice was a quiet rasp. "For now," Kalen confirmed, his tone clipped and formal. He needed to re-establish distance, to regain control of the situation. "The immediate threat is neutralized." Elian slowly got to his feet, his movements stiff. He did not leave the relative safety of the room, but stood in the doorway, half in shadow, half in light. The waves of his heat seemed to have subsided, the feverish flush gone from his skin, his scent muted to a soft, lingering sweetness, like the ghost of jasmine on the night air. The lull would be temporary, Kalen knew. An Omega's heat cycle, once triggered, was a relentless biological imperative. "I need answers," Kalen said, his voice hard. "Your real name, your origin, how you came to be in my service with a forged biofile." Elian flinched at the harshness of his tone, but his chin lifted a fraction. "My name is Elian. As for the rest, I remember very little before the Concordance re-education facility. My memories are fragmented. They told me I was an orphan, a ward of the state. They told me my biology was defective, that they were helping me." "They lied," Kalen stated flatly. "No Omega with a scent like yours is a defect. You are a prime, a genetic throwback to the pre-concordance era. They are thought to be extinct." He had read about them in classified historical archives. Primes were said to possess not just potent pheromones, but empathic abilities, the power to influence the emotions of those around them. They were seen as a threat to the Concordance's rigid social order, which was built on the suppression of emotion and instinct. They had been systematically hunted, their bloodlines purged. "Prime," Elian whispered the word, as if tasting it for the first time. A flicker of something, recognition, pain, crossed his face. "My mother. I think she used that word." He looked at Kalen, his gaze direct and piercing. "They didn't just suppress me. They tried to erase me. What do you think they will do to me now that I have re-emerged?" The question hung in the air between them, sharp and unavoidable. Kalen knew the answer. Elian would be taken to a black site. He would be vivisected, his unique biology studied and catalogued. His mind would be dissected for any memories of his lineage. He would be an experiment, a collection of data points until he was no longer useful, at which point he would be neutralized. "That will not happen," Kalen said, the words leaving his mouth before he had consciously formed them. Another instinctual declaration. Elian's eyes searched his face, looking for the truth behind the statement. "Why?" he asked again, the same simple, devastating question as before. Why do you care? Kalen started, but he had no logical answer. Because your scent unravels me. Because the thought of them putting their hands on you fills me with a violence I haven't felt in years. Because you are the first real thing to enter my life in a decade. These were not reasons he could articulate, not truths he was ready to face. Valerius is my rival, he said instead, seizing on a politically sound explanation. He has been seeking leverage against me for years. If he discovered I had an unregistered Omega on my staff, a prime no less, he would use it to ruin me. Your survival is now linked to my own. It is a matter of self-preservation. It was a plausible lie, a shield for a truth that was far more terrifying. Elian watched him, his expression unreadable. Kalen couldn't tell if he believed the cold, political calculus. So I am your secret, Elian said softly. Your liability, another variable to be controlled. You are a complication I must manage, Kalen corrected him, his voice cold. He needed this distance. He needed Elian to be a problem to be solved, not a person to be protected. But as he looked at the man dwarfed by his own clothes, standing in the shadows, his quiet strength a fragile shield against a world that wanted to destroy him, Kalen knew he was lying to himself. He had made a choice in the heat of the moment, and now, in the cold light of the aftermath, he was trying to build a logical framework around it. But there was nothing logical about this. He had taken a step into the wilderness, and the ghost he had once ignored was now his only companion in the shadows. The path forward was no longer clear. All he knew was that they were in this together, two prisoners of a system they had both, in their own ways, defied. The hours that followed stretched into a strange, suspended reality. The penthouse, once a symbol of Kalen's absolute control, became a gilded cage for them both. The sun rose, casting long, sterile fingers of light across the white marble floors, but the world outside the panoramic windows felt a universe away. Kalen had sealed the residence, citing a security protocol breach to his automated staff, placing the entire penthouse on indefinite lockdown. No one came in, and no one went out. He spent the morning at his terminal, systematically erasing any trace of Attendant 734 from the Varys household logs. He sliced through layers of concordance bureaucracy, redirecting data, corrupting files, creating a false trail that suggested the attendant had been transferred to an off-world mining colony 2 days prior. It was a risky, intricate dance of digital forgery, and any misstep could trigger alarms within the Directorate's systems. But Kalen was a master of systems, and he moved through the firewalls and security protocols with the cold precision of a surgeon. He was building a new reality, a digital lie to protect a biological truth. Elian watched him from a distance, a silent observer in this strange new dynamic. He had emerged from the safe room, but he kept to the periphery of the vast living space, as if unsure of his right to occupy it. He moved with a quiet, tentative grace, his bare feet making no sound on the floor. The heat had receded for now, leaving him in a state of heightened, almost painful awareness. His senses, so long dormant, were now wide open, drinking in the world with a raw, unfiltered intensity. He could smell the faint, clean scent of Kalen's skin beneath the lingering pine of his pheromones. He could hear the almost sub-audible hum of the data terminal, the soft click of Kalen's fingers on the holographic interface. He felt like a newborn, his nerves exposed, every sensation amplified. He was acutely aware of Kalen's presence, a constant, powerful hum at the edge of his consciousness. The alpha was focused, absorbed in his work, but Elian could feel the tension radiating from him, the tightly coiled energy of a predator forced into stillness. He was a dangerous man. Elian had no illusions about that. His protection was a matter of convenience, of political necessity. He was an asset to be managed, a secret to be kept. Yet he could not forget the raw, untamed power Kalen had unleashed to shield him from the enforcers, the way his scent had been a violent, protective blanket. He had felt it even through the shielded walls, a territorial roar that had claimed the space, and him with it. There was more than self-preservation at play here. There was instinct, and that was perhaps even more dangerous than the cold logic Kalen projected. Around midday, Kalen finally pushed back from his terminal, the faint lines of strain around his eyes a little deeper. He had done all he could. Attendant 734 was, for all intents and purposes, a ghost in the machine. "It is done," he announced to the silent room. "For now, you do not exist." Elian simply nodded, his hands clasped behind his back. The silence between them was thick with unspoken questions. "You need to eat," Kalen said, his tone shifting from strategist to something else. It was a simple, factual statement, but it felt like the first acknowledgement of Elian as a living, breathing being with needs, rather than a problem to be solved. He gestured towards the nutrition alcove. "The synthesizer is programmed with my dietary regimen. It should suffice." He turned to leave, to retreat back into the fortress of his study. But Elian's voice stopped him. "Why are you called Lord?" The question was so unexpected, so out of place, that Kalen froze. He turned back slowly. Elian was watching him with a genuine, unnerving curiosity. "It is a hereditary title," Kalen answered, his voice stiff. "From the pre-concordance era, a relic of an old system. A system of alphas and omegas," Elian stated, not as a question, but as a fact. A system where a name like Prime meant something. Something other than defect. Kalen said nothing. Elian was peeling back the layers, cutting through the sterile present to the messy, biological past his society had tried so hard to bury. The Varys line was one of the oldest, Kalen admitted, his voice low. They believed that instinct, when honed by discipline, was a source of strength, not a weakness to be medicated away. He was speaking more than he intended, revealing a crack in his own concordance-forged armor. "And what do you believe, Lord Varys?" Elian asked softly, taking a tentative step closer. The question was a direct challenge to the man, not the title. It demanded a personal truth, not a political recitation. Kalen looked at him, at this impossible man who had shattered his world. He saw the intelligence in his eyes, the quiet resilience that had survived years of chemical and psychological abuse. He saw a survivor, not a victim. And in that moment, the carefully constructed walls between them seemed to thin, to become almost translucent. What did he believe? He believed in order, in control, in the suppression of the chaos that lurked just beneath the surface. But he had just lied to his superiors, broken protocol, and unleashed his own primal instincts to protect this man. His actions were a direct contradiction of his beliefs. "I believe," Kalen said slowly, the words feeling foreign on his tongue, "that the concordance has made a grave error in judgment. They have mistaken control for strength and suppression for peace. They have tried to prune the tree of our nature, and in doing so, they have created a forest of ghosts." It was a confession, An admission of heresy. He had said it aloud, to the one person who could truly understand it. A profound silence fell between them. Elian's expression softened, the guarded watchfulness in his eyes replaced by a flicker of understanding, of a shared, forbidden truth. He had seen the man behind the mask. In that quiet moment of shared dissent, the foundation of a new dynamic was laid. They were no longer just a protector and his ward, a master and his secret. They were co-conspirators, allies, two individuals standing on the precipice of a rebellion that, for now, existed only in the silent, locked-down space of the penthouse. But the seeds of it had been sown, and the sterile ground of Kaelin's life was proving to be surprisingly fertile. The fragile truce was shattered later that day by a resurgence of Ilian's heat. It came on suddenly, a violent, physiological ambush. One moment, he was sitting quietly, observing the city lights flicker to life as dusk fell. The next, he was gasping, a crippling wave of heat and pain doubling him over. Kaelin found him on the floor, curled into a tight ball, his body trembling uncontrollably. The scent was back, stronger than before, a desperate, feverish perfume of jasmine and rain-soaked earth, now laced with a sharp, clear note of distress. It was a scent that bypassed all logic, all discipline, and struck Kaelin directly in the most primal part of his brain. It was the scent of a mate in pain. His own instincts surged, a violent, protective wave that was almost impossible to control. He wanted to gather Elian up, to take him to his chambers, to his bed, to surround him with his own scent and guard him against all harm. He wanted to soothe the pain, to answer the biological call that was screaming through the air. He fought it. He stood over Elian, his body rigid, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists, the muscles in his jaw aching from the strain. He was the Lord, the master of control. He would not be ruled by this. "The safe room," he gritted out, his voice a raw rasp. "Get to the safe room, the filters." "No," Elian gasped from the floor, his face pale with sweat. I can't go back in the dark, not alone." The plea was raw, stripped of all pretense. It was not the voice of a political asset, but of a terrified man at the mercy of his own body, begging not to be abandoned. The carefully constructed walls of Kaelin's control crumbled to dust. He knelt, his movements stiff and uncertain, and reached out. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then gently touched Elian's shoulder. The contact was an electric shock. Elian's skin was burning hot, and a fine tremor ran through him. He flinched at the touch, but didn't pull away. Instead, he uncurled slightly, his luminous, pain-filled eyes finding Kaelin's. In that moment, Kaelin saw the full depth of Elian's vulnerability and the sheer, terrifying force of his own protective instinct. This was not about politics. It was not about self-preservation. It was about the man shivering on his floor. "My chambers," Kaelin heard himself say, his voice rough with an emotion he refused to name. "The scent is already there. It will be more comfortable." He was offering his nest, the most private, most protected space an alpha possessed. It was a profound, instinctual gesture, a declaration he hadn't intended to make. He helped Elian to his feet, his arm around the Omega's slender waist, supporting his weight. Elian leaned against him, his head resting against Kaelin's shoulder for a moment, a silent, temporary surrender. The scent of his distress was heart-wrenching, a fragrant cry for help. Kaelin led him slowly, carefully, into the inner sanctum of the penthouse, the room where this had all begun. He helped Elian onto the large, dark bed, and the Omega immediately curled into himself, burying his face in the pillows that still carried Kalen's scent. A soft, pained sound escaped him, a mixture of relief and misery. Kalen stood by the bed, a helpless giant. He had no medications, no suppressants. He had only himself. His instincts were screaming at him, a chorus of primal commands: surround him, comfort him, mark him, claim him. He fought them back, but it was like trying to hold back the tide with his bare hands. He could offer only one thing that might help, a piece of his own instinct, tempered by will. Slowly, deliberately, he began to release his own scent again. Not the overwhelming, aggressive wave he had used against the enforcers, but a controlled, steady stream. It was the scent of calm, of security, of sanctuary, pine and stone, the scent of a safe harbor in a storm. He saturated the room with it, a pheromonal blanket designed to soothe and protect. He watched as Elian's trembling began to subside, his breathing evening out. The sharp note of distress in his scent softened, the frantic edge blunted by the calming presence of Kalen's pheromones. He had not surrendered to his instincts, Kalen told himself. He had weaponized them. He had used his alpha nature as a tool, a form of non-physical intervention. It was a desperate piece of self-deception. He was standing guard over a suffering Omega in his own nest, blanketing him in his scent, every cell in his body humming with the need to protect him. He was no longer a lord managing a complication. He was an alpha tending to his... He cut the thought off, viciously. He could not afford to name it. He sat in a chair in the corner of the room, a silent sentinel, and watched Elian drift into a fitful, feverish sleep. He would stay there all night, a guardian at the gates of a storm, fighting a battle not against the concordance, but against the undeniable truth of his own heart. He was irrevocably, terrifyingly bound to the man on his bed, and the most dangerous part of their journey had just begun.